So welcome to this session. As you can see, my name is Massimo Refere. I'm a vCloud architect with VMware. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes to give you a little bit of background of what this session is all about and who I am. So I spent 15 years at IBM, and in February, I got a call from VMware saying, there is an opening for a vCloud architect position. Do you want to take it? I said, sure, but what the hell is cloud, right? So that's how it all started, okay? So when I submitted this session in March, a month later, I said, I think that we need to have something, and obviously this session is just one of the many things that we will probably need to do to give an idea to those guys used to virtualization, what cloud is, and because we are not getting it, or at least I wasn't getting it, okay? So that was the idea behind this session. And by the way, when I submitted this session in March, I had no idea whatsoever about what I was going to talk about, which gives kind of the impression that I know now what I'm going to talk about, which I'm not sure. But no, joking aside, okay, this is kind of the background for the session, okay? So I say that this is kind of pretty basic. Some of the concepts Steve Harrod have already covered this morning. I will fly for those things that he has covered already. But let's start with a few things. So can you read this? Okay, thanks. So I think that, as I said, there is a little bit of confusion. So I hope that I'm not going to fall off here. But there is a little bit of confusion about, what cloud is. And I was surprised when, well, I wasn't actually that much surprised in July when I saw this survey that we were doing where we were asking, what is your definition of a public cloud, and what people were saying. The first one said a place where people share their different opinions, which doesn't really cut it, right? The other one was any device, anywhere, anytime. This is too much Citrix. I don't like it. Okay? So I like this. I like this because you can't say that this is wrong, really. So the public cloud offers the service to the public, which is right. And then there are other things, obviously, like my idea of a public cloud could be an infrastructure as a service cloud where you could dynamically vMotion a virtual machine workload into and out of a public cloud and these kind of things. And way more advanced and more accurate responses that people that are used to this environment provided in the survey. So there is certainly people that understand this environment very well and other people that are still trying to understand what the hell this is, okay? So this is the agenda that I was trying to put together. So there is a very basic introduction, whether we say, hype or reality. Is this hype or reality? And then we kind of have a slide that says what is cloud, basically. It's a summary about all the things that we call cloudy, in a way. And then there is, the part in the middle is really the meat of the presentation. And I want to touch on these three things, which I call the contract, the sandbox, and the choice, that in these last 5-6 months were, kind of, okay, this is what cloud is, to me at least. And I want to kind of to share my thoughts on this. And then closing, I wanted to touch a little bit on the adoption model that we believe is going to take place in this environment, okay? So, hyper-reality. I wanted to show you this slide. This is kind of, a standard slide where we say, okay, you have your project, your VMs, and you have silos of compute, storage, network, and this kind of stuff, okay? And then what we say is, on-demand ready, you can buy it, rent it, share it, or a mix of it, which sounds very cloud, right? Problem is that I presented this slide in 2004. So I'm not showing these slides just to say that I'm a visionary. I'm a geek like many of you here. So I have no clue why you would, in 2004, share an infrastructure or doing a mix of this. I was just saying, with the technology that we are using, you can actually do these things, okay? Another couple of slides, and I'm not sure if you are familiar with this template. I will show you what this template is, this green one. But I presented a couple of other slides called Intercompany Deployment, where we show the infrastructure here, and that we show someone that wants to install a virtual appliance on the infrastructure. So he says basically, I want to deploy this VM, and I need this much CPU, memory, whatever. And then there is someone at the infrastructure level that says, okay, you're good to go, upload the virtual appliance. So the guy uploads the virtual appliance, he is happy, and there is someone else that says, okay, your bill is this much, okay? Similarly, if you think about this, and this was the next slide in this presentation, was what I call the intercompany deployment, okay? So you have the same guy talking to his infrastructure guys saying, I need to deploy this application, and I'm looking for a place to deploy this application, okay? Where do I go? And there is someone saying, you can deploy it here. So the guy takes this one and deploy it over there. I have no clue whatever in 2007 what this was. But what I said is, with the technologies that we are using here, you can actually do this. And you can actually do these kind of things, okay? So I'm not a visionary. I'm just a geek that was using the technology and was saying, I mean, this technology can do many more things than just server consolidation, okay? And it's obviously at the basis of what we are doing from a cloud perspective, at least from an infrastructure as a service cloud perspective, okay? So what is cloud? So when I get asked what cloud is, I usually come up with these, 8, 9 data points. So there isn't anything like you install this piece of software and you are in the cloud, okay? Cloud is really, to me, just a kind of, trying to rationalize under an umbrella or, an effort, all of those things that we have seen in the previous 3 slides and all those potential, and try to exploit those potentials, okay? So to me, cloud is, for example, workload location independence. So it's not like you can deploy locally and that's it, but you can choose either to deploy locally, remotely, or whatever. And when I say remotely, I don't just mean in a data center that I own on the other side of the world. I mean public cloud of thing, okay? Service portals, very important. Steve and Paul mentioned these today, and I have a few slides on this concept of empowering the end user to do stuff in a much easier way, okay? In a self-service type of thing. More automation, and I happen to talk to some customers where they say, to me, cloud is automation. That's okay, but that's an attribute, okay? That is one of the many things. So the more things that you do on this slide, the more cloudy you are, okay? Pay-per-use for public cloud. So this is a notion of chargeback or showback for the private cloud. So one of the current themes is it's okay to charge back if you're a public cloud provider to your end user, but if you are in a private cloud environment, it's not very usual to charge back your internal user. So this mechanism and charge back the product itself may be used to do what we call the showback to the business. This is how much it costs you to do this kind of stuff. Because there are many customers and many IT organizations that are being faced with the challenge that their executive says, this public cloud provider is charging this much for the VM or for whatever application, blah, blah. How much does this cost to us? No idea, okay? So chargeback mechanism using more to show back to the business how much it costs to run the show, okay? The other one is elastic, so a feeling of infinite resources, but that's, we know that is not possible, and it's just a perception. Interface standardization, we will touch on these in a few moments, in a few slides. So when I say workload location independence, this is very tied to this concept of interface standardization. So if I have this flexibility of deploying my application here or there, or moving it from here to there, I would like to have a common method to do this. I don't want to use a tool to deploy it here, a web browser to deploy it over there, and another tool to deploy it on the other side of the world. Okay? Stack standardization, which is the notion of the catalog of services. So Steve and Paul this morning were mentioning that end users, the business, doesn't really want virtual machine. They want a service up and running, right? So this notion of a catalog of service is very important when you talk about cloud. And obviously multi-tenancy, okay? This is really skewed toward the public cloud world, where in order to make a better use of all of the resources, you can have multiple customers on the same physical infrastructure. That's what multi-tenancy is, okay? So that's pretty much kind of introduction to what we're talking about. And now I wanted to, so the way I organize this is I wanted to give you a sense of, a philosophical concept associated to the contract, to the sandbox, and to the choice. And then I would like to dive a little bit, well, as much as you can dive with 4 slides per each of those topics, but to give you a sense of reality of what that philosophy is, okay? So let's get philosophical, number 1. So first of all, cloud, the way I see cloud is pretty much moving from product to services. And I'm not talking about, a public cloud service provider. I'm talking cloud in general, okay? Whether you do it private in your house, or you do it in your business house, or you do it with a service provider. But it's fundamentally a move away from product to services, okay? And if you think about how IT works today, at least in most customers that I've been visiting, is a kind of, there is someone buying servers, then there is someone else installing these servers, installing the OS, and then at some point they hand out these, what they created to the end user that is going to, use and consume these resources, and the end users kind of help them at some point to set this up. There is no a clear definition of the responsibilities that there is in the consumer and in the provider space. So cloud to me is kind of moving from that, who owns this middle area when there is a problem, whatever, into more like a contract between a service provider and the consumer. And when I said, again, a service provider, I really mean someone giving me, the resources. It could be Verizon, it could be Terramark, it could be my chap next to the office because it is running my IT. But it's more like a contract. If you happen to read the DMTF white papers, if you want to sleep at night, I strongly suggest that. No, I'm kidding. They're very interesting if you are into this matter, because they give you this idea that it's all about creating a contract between someone and someone else. Okay? So to this point, to the point of the contract, the contract is really defined by these 3 major aspects: the what, where, and who. Okay? So the what is easy. So most of you have heard about the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. So basically, this kind of, tells you how deep your contract is. So fundamentally, if you are subscribing to an infrastructure as a service type of contract, you are getting a bunch of physical resources, most likely as virtual machines, but you're getting infrastructure type of things. Okay? If you are subscribing a platform as a service type of contract, you're getting more. You're getting some middleware database type of stuff. Okay? If you are contracting for software as a service, you are getting the application basically. Okay? And every piece of this has a place in what we do on a daily basis. So it's not like this is going to disappear because this is going to take over, and in a couple of years this is going to take over, and this kind of stuff. So it's really going to be a fit for many different circumstances, okay? And here you have a few examples of, services like this. So in this presentation, we are focusing more on this part here, the infrastructure as a services part, okay? So very often we get asked, which way should I go? Should I go for infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service? At the end of the day, it boils down to whether you want to have more control and more flexibility with the burden of managing a large part of the stack, which is the infrastructure as a service, or you're more interested in not managing anything but don't get any flexibility. So if you buy an application in a software as a service type of environment, you can certainly tune a little bit, customize a little bit, but that's what you get in the end of the day. It's not like you can do everything like you could do, for example, in the infrastructure as a service, okay? So, a couple of slides to confuse you on purpose, okay? No, I really mean that, because the more I confuse you with these next slides, the more you get that it is not important who is signing that contract. It could be, if you think about the number of permutation that you can have, it would be pretty much kind of infinite, okay? So this is a typical public cloud environment. So the who and where, it would be the service provider, Verizon, Terramark, these guys providing resources to enterprises, okay? So in this example, I said Nissan and Fiat Group, okay? Just because I'm from Italy and I like to mention Fiat Group, okay? And this would be a public cloud type of thing, okay? The other thing that everybody kind of get is the private cloud. So instead of going to Verizon, Terramark, I want to build this in-house. So it's my IT, the provider of the resources. So as you may know, Fiat Group has a number of organizations inside. So I'm not using the, HR, R&D. So I'm using actual organizations like Alfa Romeo, Chrysler. These are sub-organizations to Fiat Group, okay? And I mentioned this because I found, funny that we own a U.S. company. But, well, Fiat Group, just for your information, owns part of Ferrari, which is even more ridiculous. And then you have something like, and this is where start to get a little bit confusing, a private cloud hosted and managed by the service provider, okay? So it doesn't really matter where you're hosting your cloud in-house or you're hosting it at the service provider side. It really matters who and where these things are and who and where the contractors are, basically. And then there is this other notion of the federation between the private cloud and the public cloud. So can you see here, this was private here, and now gets public. Why it gets public? Because it's multi-tenant, because we have Fiat Group and Nissan, which are two different customers, two completely different customers. So in this scenario here, we would be federating this part here with this part here over here. Nissan may be federating his own part somewhere with this part here, okay? Even more confusing, the fact that you can move now your entire private cloud and federating it with a portion of this public cloud, all served by the service provider. Again, I'm trying to confuse you on purpose because this is really about a contract that you do between someone and someone else. Whether it is your local IT or your service provider, it doesn't really matter, okay? So the other point, and I like this more, is what is this, self-service type of thing. Okay, I can get them connect to a web portal, order a VM. Is this the self-service portal that we are talking about? And I think that the more I use the product, the vCloud Director, which has been our focus for the last few months, the more I was thinking, what we are doing here is we are giving some of the flexibility that we IT admin have appreciated in the data center to those end users. So think about this. I mean, when we use virtualization in our data centers, as let's say we are all IT admin, we took lots and lots of advantages from virtualization, but we didn't, really expose those advantages to the end user, other than they could get now a VM in a day rather than in 2 months. Okay? So that's the advantage that the end user was having. But what we are doing here is we are kind of giving them back some of the flexibility that we have experienced in the last few years using VMware product. And if you think about what's going on in the data center, you have vSphere with a bunch of resources, data store, resource pool, memory. We have vSwitch, port groups, vShield. Most of you haven't used vShield. Most of you will probably use vShield in the coming years, because I think that it's very cool. And then we have templates. And at the end of the day, we do have this sandbox, which is the VM, where the end user will install the guest OS and could do pretty much everything. So this is their sandbox in a way. Would you agree? So you have, as the IT admin, you would have control over everything here. And what you're giving them to play with is a sandbox called a VM. So you give them a VM and you say, do whatever you do, I don't care. But I own everything else. So what cloud is, in my opinion, and what vCloud Director allows you to do is, in a very controlled way, do something like this. So give them back some of the flexibility that we have appreciated in the data center in what we call the virtual data center, that we hand over to them and say, do whatever you want, I don't care. Because you are in a sort of controlled environment where you have maximum flexibility, you can do whatever you want without causing too much trouble. Okay? So how do we do this? So we do this creating a number of different virtual constructs on top of vSphere. So if you look at the history of VMware technology, we started with ESX. We had a bunch of tools to manage ESX. And then we had Virtual Center, which kind of matures, and we had other products coming along on the side. This is very important to understand. All these products typically come on the side of vSphere. vCloud Director is pretty different because it goes on top of vSphere. Okay? vCloud Director goes on top of vSphere. It works in conjunction with Chargeback and with vShield to create those sandbox that we have been talking about in the previous slide. So whenever you have a chance to look at vCloud Director and you start playing with it, this is basically what it does. And if you follow this flow, you will get the product in a much easier way. It took me months. Okay? So this is vSphere. We have your, fiber channel SATA, and then you have resource pool, which are either HA enabled or non-HA enabled, for example. And then you have this vSwitch with a number of port groups. That's your, bread and butter. This is what you know, right? So what we are doing with vCloud Director is we are creating these very new virtual objects that are called provider VDC, where we fundamentally group homogeneous resources, like, for example, fiber channel data store and resource pool with high availability properties, and we call them a gold provider VDC. And then we have a silver or bronze provider VDC, whatever we want to call it, which is backed by SATA and maybe non-HA enabled resource pools. Okay? What we do next within the product is we create what we call organizations, okay? Organization represent, depending whether we are talking about public or private, Fiat, Nissan, or if it is private, Alfa Romeo, Chrysler, whatever, okay? So in this case, I took the public cloud example. So I said, I create an organization called Fiat, and this is service provider X, Y, Z, whatever. And I want to subscribe with them a contract for which I want to get a bunch of gold provider VDC resources and a bunch of silver provider VDC resources, okay? Why would I do that? Because these probably cost more than this one, and maybe in the silver provider VDC, I want to deploy test and dev, and in the gold provider VDC, I want to deploy production and this kind of stuff. And in a multi-tenancy environment, what I want to do is I want to do the very same thing with other organizations sharing the very same infrastructure here, Nissan and Mercedes, for example. So they're using the very same provider VDCs, a different chunk of resources, but they are fundamentally backed by the same resources in a very controlled way. The last thing is I need to connect these things to a network, and this is where vShield Edge come into place. So I'm not going to discuss into the details the networking part because it would take 4 hours just to cover the networking part. But what we are doing with vShield Edge is very, very funny in a way. Basically, where we can create separate networks here, netted and firewall networks, and all this kind of stuff. But the funny thing is that it's not like we are controlling this from an IT admin perspective, because we can do this today without this product. What we can do is we can say, okay, this is now your sandbox. And whatever you do within that sandbox, I don't care. You can do firewall stuff, you can do NAT, you can create port groups at the vSphere level. Yes, you can do that, end user, without causing any damage to the infrastructure in a very controlled way. No? Another important thing is that within the organization, we do have a number of additional things that I'm not covering in details, obviously, for the sake of time, which is the catalog, for example. So this is where the org admin would upload standard templates, standard VApps for the end user to use. Okay, so you have different roles because we have a role access-based access here, where you can define a number of roles within the organization where you have the admin, you are the catalog publisher, and you are the end user, whatever. Okay, lots of flexibility here. And obviously, you can access these in a very programmatic way or through the web interface. So I hope that this gives you an idea of what this product could do and what all these, empowering the end user with a self-service interface is all about. So in a way, if you think about the process that all of us goes through today is kind of, if you are in a virtualization arena, what you do basically is the user requests a VM, and then there are a number of activities that the IT admin has to do. So now this depends on the maturity of your setup. It could be either the end user picking up the phone and calling you, can you deploy this template, blah, blah, or it could be a more advanced type of thing like an orchestration or lifecycle tool that can do this for you. But essentially, IT gets in the middle in some way. What we are doing here is, in the cloud model, we are kind of giving to the end user some resources, and they can use the way they like, okay? So this life cycle is really dependent on the end user rather than on the IT once they have contracted this. Okay, so this means less work for IT, more flexibility for the end user, and faster deployment leads. Okay? So let's get to number 3 now. And this is where things become interesting. So the number 3 is what I call the choice. Okay? So, and this ties back to the fact that you can deploy in the public cloud, the private cloud, and the location independence attribute of being more cloudy than virtualization. So the idea here is that you shouldn't really matter, or you shouldn't really bother whether you are deploying it locally or in a remote site or at a remote service provider. Basically, the idea here is that we are kind of putting together an abstraction layer that gives you transparency when it comes to deploy a new workload. So in a way, you are not even aware, or you will not be aware where you are deploying this workload, locally or remotely. Well, you obviously can control that behavior because it's not like, I want to put it there, you don't know where it goes. You can control that behavior, but it is going to be as simple as choosing, from a Dropbox, do you want it to be local or remote? Or this kind of stuff, just to give you an idea, okay? So where we are going through is a sort of flat space where you have these cloud resources here, and you deploy a workload in the very same manner, whether it is local in the private cloud or in the remote cloud here. And the way we do these kind of things is through what we call the vCloud API. So the vCloud API, which is an API that is implemented within vCloud Director, allows you to talk to a cloud service, whether it is private, whether it is public, in the very same way, with the very same semantics and with the very same tools, so that you can choose whether to deploy here or whatever, okay? The other thing is, and when we talk about this kind of stuff, we usually get asked, okay, very futuristic view, how about getting there gradually from where we are? Because, this is a nice picture. You have a web portal, you can do, all of your fancy stuff. But at the end of the day, let's face it, we have ESX host, vCenter, and the vSphere client, don't we? Okay? So wouldn't it be nice if we provide a bridge between where we are today and where we want to be tomorrow, which is this picture here? So what we are working on right now is what we call the the vCloud client plugin, which allows you from the vSphere client to create and move workloads from your vSphere, from your local vSphere environment, all the way to one of these cloud providers over here. So with the help of Patrick, which is the product manager of this funny thing, if this works, I would like to show you something. Okay. So with the help of Patrick, we created this. It's not a live demo. It's more like a kind of AVI file that we recorded in the lab, where we want to show you where we are heading to with these ideas of federating the local vSphere environment with the clouds and this kind of stuff. So what you see here is probably you are familiar with this view, which is your standard vSphere client. What you see at the bottom here is what we call the vSphere client plugin, which is the plugin that I was referring to. So what we do here is we first navigate through your standard VM and templates view, just to show you the local setup that we have. We'll get there in a moment. Okay. So we're showing now the vSphere client plugin, and then we are going to the VMs and templates, okay? As you can see here, this is your standard view of template. There are a bunch of templates. There are a bunch of disconnected VMs. This is a lab environment, so don't pay too much attention to that. But fundamentally, this is the standard environment we are kind of used to. So let's go now to this plugin here. So what you do here basically is you see the exact same information that you were seeing in the other view, which is not a big deal because, I mean, you can see them in the other view, right? But what we are doing right now is something interesting, I believe. So this is your local vSphere setup, okay? What we are doing now is we need to expand our number of VMs that are running. So we have a couple of options. We either buy more ESX servers and we put them into the same cluster or in another cluster, or we source these new compute resources through a cloud provider, okay? And how we do this is through this plugin. We say, attach to a cloud provider, which I have contracted before, so this thing is not going to contract this. So you have contracted with your service provider for an organization VDC, which is what I was trying to explain in the last few slides. And we are attaching that additional computational power. Okay? What I'm typing here is fundamentally the IP address that I'm using to reach that public cloud and that service provider. Okay? I'm obviously going to use my credential, which is what they gave me when I contracted this space. Boom, and I'm done. So what I'm doing here fundamentally is I'm browsing through what that organization VDC has in it. So if you are contracting with the service provider and you are connecting for the very first time, it would be empty, right? Because you haven't yet deployed anything there. Now, this is not empty simply because we have been using that org VDC before to upload a number of VApps. So that's why it shows a number of VApps already in that portion of the org VDC, okay? What I'm doing now is I want to move a workload from a local vSphere. I'm sorry. What I'm doing now, I'm trying to go through this. You remember when I said that I want to provide more computational power because I need to deploy more VMs onto my infrastructure? I want to deploy VMs based on my standard template. I don't obviously want to use these service provider provided templates or whatsoever. So what I'm going to do now is I'm taking my gold template, which sets my standard for my organization, and I'm moving it into the cloud as a template. Okay. So this is just copy to. I'm going to say where I want to put this, which is exactly in the same org VDC that I've just mapped in the step before. And this is the location where I'm going to put this. Now, for the sake of the demo, this is going to be fast because we have used very small VMDK files. But in a real environment, this would take, obviously, longer to do this. But as you can see now, we have switched our view onto the public cloud provided resources in the catalog view, and you can see the template that we have just copied over from the local vSphere setup to the other one. So the next step here would be to instantiate and deploy a new virtual machine based off that template. Okay? And once we have done that, we can kind of, power it on. Okay? Oops, sorry. Sorry, this is going too fast. I'm sorry, folks. I need to Okay, what I'm going to do now is I want to move a workload that I have already deployed in my infrastructure. So in the previous step, what I've done is I need to deploy a brand new workload. So I'm taking a template, a local template, I'm moving it into the cloud, and I'm deploying that template into the cloud, okay? That's my standard template. What I'm doing here is I'm moving an already running workload on my infrastructure, and I want to move it into the cloud. Why would you want to do that? Maybe because you want to free some local resources and you want to move a test and development environment into the cloud to free those resources to put more Tier 1 workload, for example, into the local environment, okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of powering off my VM, because obviously you cannot do this live with vMotion or this kind of stuff. The way it works is that you power it off and you use the very same wizard to say, move these running workloads or move these already deployed workload into the cloud. Okay, so what we do is we go through pretty much the same wizard as before, with the difference that we are using and we are moving an actual VM here. We say deploy. And now we say this into the cloud. So that is the VM that we have just moved from the local vSphere client into the cloud. What we would do next here is we would power it on, obviously. Obviously, it doesn't power it on automatically. Okay? This is just to give you an idea of, what we are doing to help with this concept of, federating what you have right now with where we want to bring you in the next few months and years. Okay? So what does this mean for me, this capability of mapping these resources? If you think about this is all about the choice. So from a virtualization perspective, we have created this vSphere abstraction layer, which allows you to source kind of, compute resources from OEM 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we kind of, shield those differences. What we are doing with the cloud, basically, is we're taking a step forward, and we are going to kind of abstract also on top of the OEMs, we're going to abstract the service provider. So in a very seamless way, you can deploy your application using the very same tools, using the very same methodology, either on the local setup or in the public cloud. Okay? So closing down a little bit, and then maybe we have some time for question and answer. The adoption model, okay? So, again, this is a slide that I've been using in 2005 when talking about virtualization adoption model. And you can think about any IT infrastructure as being a pyramid like this, where you have a huge number of low-end servers here, typically test and development infrastructure type of thing, and mission-critical application over here. And we have seen a pattern in the field where you obviously start on the left and you move to the right with virtualization. This is not kind of, positioning the product, but it's more like imagining where you are going to implement this product in the field. I'm talking about this vCloud director type of thing, private cloud type of thing. We imagine you deploying these more at the beginning for application like test and development and this kind of stuff, not because this is not done to support tier 1 application, but simply because it's a win-win situation, what I call the win-win situation. This part is where you are more likely to lose control of the things. This part is more likely where your end users are requiring way more flexibility for deploying new environments like test and development, QA, and this kind of stuff. And as these things mature, we will see a broad adoption of these things. Again, I want to say that this is not a positioning of the product. It's more like, imagining where this is going to be used more in the field in the first wave of implementation, okay? This slide just goes through the very same idea with a slightly different layout. Fundamentally, it's a different way to look at the infrastructure where you need agility. Here you have your legacy thing, and here you have more control of the stuff. And we see this coming all the way here because this is where you need more agility in the first place. And then this capability of defining, gold, silver, bronze type of thing will take over time, all the way to the standard virtualization deployments over here. Okay. Again, this is another. I believe this is the last slide where I kind of imagine how things may work in the field, and in many situations they are already working like this in the field, where you have your IT administrator providing end users with SSH, RDP type of connection to virtual machines that are using on a daily basis. If you think about what you do as an IT admin, if you're an IT admin, you deploy a template and you give the IP address to the end user and you say, okay, this is your new virtual machine, go ahead and do what you need to do. And we have seen more and more in the field things like these end users being not very satisfied with the quality of the interaction with the local IT, going to buy, to the public cloud, vCloud Express type of thing, and go and buy, using a credit card, virtual machine off the web. Okay, so what we see happening as we go along is we see IT admins trying to mimic what these guys are doing, creating what we call the private cloud, just to give the end user the very same flexibility and the very same, the very same flexibility and the very same experience that they are seeing going off the web into the public cloud, okay? So they can have the very same interface to access both the public resources and the private cloud resources here. The other thing, and this goes back to the announcement that we made this morning for the vCloud Data Center program, the IT admin itself could go and contract a portion of this data center. So this is more like I need to buy 10 virtual machines right now, and I need them in 10 minutes. My IT is not able to do that. I need to go to a vCloud Express service provider to get there. This is more like I would call it a kind of a strategic thing where the IT says, I have a bunch of workload that I'm running. I think that if I offload this workload to a public cloud with a vCloud Data Center program, I may be more cost effective for my IT. So what I'm doing here is I'm fundamentally trying to contract some gold and silver organization VDC, so that within the same interface, which is the interface that I was showing, I can manage both the local resources, the private cloud resources, and the public cloud resources in a very homogeneous way. Okay? This is just an example of what might happen in the field, and to some extent we have seen this happening already. Okay? And obviously the advantage here, which is what I was trying to show you with the demo, is that you can really think about moving this workload around this service provider, the private cloud, the local vSphere in a sort of seamless manner because of the vCloud APIs that we have very briefly touched on. Okay? So in conclusion, very easily, cloud is not a hype. I hope that I gave you this idea that there are a bunch of stuff that, first of all, are possible, and at the end of the day, the business required to get that agility and to get that flexibility that we have been talking about. VMware is really to provide the backbone for this infrastructure, both for the private cloud and for the public cloud, just to give the possibility to have this federation possible, okay? So the call to action is, if you are interested in private cloud, go and have a look to our vCloud Director. If you are interested in public cloud, go and search for a vCloud service ready service provider, and you can find all the information at these two links here. And obviously, your VMware sales rep is more than happy to talk to you about these kind of things. Okay. So with this, I'm done. We still have some 10 minutes. So if there is any question or any doubt, comment, concern, whatever. Yeah. So HA support is really tied to disaster recovery type of thing, and it is something that we are still looking into in terms of how to integrate all these new products into a model that allows you to fail over an entire data center into a cloud. I hope were you referring to that one, or? Well, HA, you need to think about HA in the context of a cluster. What we are doing here is more like, federating and putting together more different cluster resources. So it's not like what you're running here could fail over with an HA standard mechanism to the cloud. So you would need something external to that to drive that behavior. And one of these things would be certainly SRM, but obviously this is, site-wise. It's not virtual machine-wise or ESX host-wise. In terms of vMotion, there are lots of challenges in trying to do vMotion over a long distance. So we do have some technology partners like F5, EMC that have demonstrated how to do this. So you can technically do this in the first wave of the implementation that we are going to see. This is not like something that you can do like a checkbox, enable vMotion and everything, Any other question? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. So the demo, I'm sorry. So the demo that I was showing was kind of simplistic. So first of all, as I mentioned, I have used very small VMDK file to do that. So what we do basically is we export at the vSphere level the VM, and we copy what we have exported into the cloud, and we upload that as an OVF file. Okay. There may be issues with the IP readdressing. So there are many scenarios that you can think of, such as you can even have, and this would be hard, I admit, but a stretch L2 segment where you don't even have to re-IP your virtual machine. Or there may be some more mechanism to do this, and we were discussing about having the possibility to have this in the interface that I showed, where you may have something like move this virtual machine from the local vSphere setup to this cloud resource and plug in this new IP address when you move it over there. Well, but that would be an IP copy, okay? Well, what we do with, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, but what we do with what you see is we export the VM that we want to move into the cloud locally as an OVF, as a VApp fundamentally, and then we take that file and we copy with standard, IP-based type of thing onto the cloud, onto the data store where I'm going to register and upload that VApp. So I don't see this really as a storage problem. It's certainly going to be a network problem from a transfer perspective, and from an IP perspective, as we were saying, but there is no correlation between the local storage and the remote storage. I'm not sure if I'm getting your question right. You don't have to access the same storage. What I'm trying to say is you export locally that VM, you take that VM that you have exported, you copy it onto the storage at the service provider side, you can delete the original file then, and then you instantiate that VM on the storage at the public provider side. Okay? We can talk this offline. Is there any other question, doubt, comment? Yeah.
I see a lot of similarities between service-oriented architecture and cloud computing. There was a lot of technology talked about in the early 2000s, and W3C was one of those that talked about web semantics and web services. And they say within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of that infrastructure perspective and mathematic testing stuff. And I see a lot of this from an IaaS perspective. And there are other types of services that was actually talked about back in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take that more as a comment than as a question, and I agree that we're moving towards that kind of, SOA type of thing, applied to different, scenarios and kind of stuff. But I agree. I mean, it's. Yeah. 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 Good. Any other question? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a release product. It's, talk to Patrick if you want to know more. Okay, thank you, guys.